They call it the valley where bears and wolves never cross. That's not its real name, of course. It's not on any map. You hear about it in whispers, in the silences between stories told by old hunters and rangers. They talk about elk herds that would detour for 100 miles just to avoid it. Satellite images show a strange blank smear, a place where weather data just goes static, and every single one of them agrees on one impossible fact. Bears and wolves do not cross the same invisible line in that valley. Not when they're starving, not when they're wounded, not even when they're chasing prey right to the edge. An instinct that powerful, that absolute, it doesn't happen by accident. This is the story of Eli Mercer. He was a drifter, a former search and rescue volunteer in a world that had slowly collapsed. Towns, laws, certainly they were all gone. Eli was just moving west, through broken mountains where highways just ended in trees and the silence had a physical weight to it. He carried a small, worn notebook filled with names, the names of every single person he had failed to save. Writing them down was his last way of proving that he and they had ever existed. When Eli finally stood on the ridge line overlooking the valley, he understood why the locals refused to camp anywhere within sight of it. The land looked normal, but in a way that felt staged, like a play. The grass was too still. The trees grew at odd angles, as if they were hesitating to reach for the sun. Shadows pooled in places where sunlight should have been landing. The first real proof was waiting for him down in the mud, a massive grizzly track pressed forward with total confidence and dominance. Then it just ended, as if it had been erased from the earth. Directly opposite, a chain of wolf prints approached from the other side and stopped at the exact same unseen boundary. The spacing was careful, deliberate, respectful, like soldiers halting before a grave. Eli felt it then. It wasn't exactly fear. It was pressure. The kind of pressure you feel when you walk into a room where a violent argument has just ended and the echoes are still hanging in the air. As he stepped down into the valley, the air thickened, sound just dampened, absorbed by the silence. And then, memories that weren't his own started leaking into his head like radio static. He saw flashes, first soaked dark with blood, paws slipping on slick ice, the sickening crack of ribs caught in a steel trap, fire racing through a forest, and human hands shaking as they loaded rifles they barely knew how to use. Eli dropped to one knee, his heart pounding in a rhythm that wasn't his. It was beating like it was remembering something far older than his own body. The valley began to explain itself, not with words, but with raw experience. Long before this land was called America, before there were borders or myths, something had crawled out of the mountain's hollow core. It wasn't a creature that killed to survive. It killed to understand. It was a thing that learned fear by consuming it, that wore hunger like a form of intelligence. It hunted everything with cold equality bears, wolves, people. It learned how panic floods through muscle, how hope collapses just when escape seems possible. The animals, sensing an extinction-level wrongness, did something evolution never intended. They cooperated. For one terrifying period, they formed an alliance of desperation, wolves driving, bears blocking, and the early humans following with fire and noise. Together, they pushed the thing into this specific valley where the earth itself was unstable. And there, in a single night of shared terror and shared sacrifice, they tore it apart. But they didn't know. They didn't know that killing its body wouldn't kill the lesson it had learned. When the thing died, its final awareness, its final understanding of terror, soaked into the land itself. It imprinted every death it had ever caused, every ending it had ever studied. The valley became a recorder, a perpetual loop, replaying the worst possible moment of each species to any living mind that dared to enter. It wasn't a hallucination. It was inherited memory. So, when a bear entered, it learned again the helplessness of traps and fire. When a wolf stepped across the line, it relived the agony of starvation, the freezing ice, the cruelty of humans. And when people entered, they experienced betrayal, burial, extinction, and the crushing realization that survival does not mean safety. Over generations, instinct adapted. It drew a line in the dirt that no animal would cross because the valley didn't threaten the body. It threatened the will to continue, the very will to exist. Eli understood all of this as the memories intensified. He started seeing American ghosts, too. Settlers freezing to death in their wagons. Native villages burned to the ground. Soldiers abandoned by their commanders. Families starving in dust storms. The valley didn't care about era or flag. It just asked the same silent question over and over again, knowing that all this pain repeats. Do you still choose to exist? The bears answered no by turning away. The wolves answered no by circling wide. But humans, uniquely broken and stubborn, sometimes answered yes, not because they had hope, but because refusal felt like a final surrender. And so, Eli kept walking. He had already buried hope too many times to pretend it could still be killed. At the center of the valley, he found them. The bones. They were arranged in deliberate, perfect spirals. Grizzly skulls, wolf ribs, human femurs, all smoothed by time. This wasn't a graveyard. It was a warning sign. In the presence, there wasn't a monster. There was no voice. There was only that immense pressure, silently asking him whether continuation was a mercy or a cruelty. Eli answered by opening his notebook, and in the crushing silence, he began to read the names aloud. Every person he had failed, every scream he still carried in his own memory. He was offering the valley proof that memory can be carried forward, not just hoarded. That pain doesn't have to stay rooted in the ground to poison everything around it. And the pressure eased, just slightly, just enough that when he reached the far edge of the valley, his lungs finally drew a full, deep breath. Behind him, the land seemed to settle, as if something ancient had finally unclenched its fist. Months later, a lone wolf placed one paw past the invisible line before cautiously retreating. Years later, a young bear crossed at dawn without roaring in terror. Eventually, tracks began to overlap where none ever had before. Predators sharing a path without ever knowing why they now could. The valley grew quiet, not with fear, but with a sense of rest. Somewhere far from there, Eli Mercer died, unnamed, his notebook lost to the weather. But the question the valley once asked had learned a new answer, an answer not spoken, but proven. That memory does not have to be a curse, and that survival, even in a broken world, can still be a choice. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Stay curious.